Today I'm making a post-rotation tier list, so this will be for G block and on standard format regulation. And this is a bit of a speculative tier list since we are still weeks away from the rotation hitting in TPCI jurisdiction regions. But I have been studying City League events results, Champions League results from Japan, analyzing the data from that, looking at deck lists, theorizing matchups, building deck lists, now even starting to test the matchups. So I do have a pretty good understanding, at least for this point, of what looks to be good from Japan, how I think it's going to shake out when we do finally hit rotation. So I'll be talking about these archetypes, but then I will also be sharing data from Japan, and I will also be sharing deck lists from Japan. So this will not be such a one-toned tier list video you might be used to. So we will make the tier list here. This will be based on my opinion, but then we're going to go look at a tier list from Japan that's completely based on statistics being scraped from city leagues, and we'll also look at some of the deck lists from those as well. So looking at the metagame right now, we see that there are two very, very strong archetypes, both very popular and very strong. And those are Dragapult, typically being Dragapult Dusknoir with Badu, and the Noctowl Ogerpon box, which you might know of because Tord Reklev and Rahul Reddy actually went to Champions League Fukuoka and played that deck. Tord placed in the top 16, so his list is readily available to see on Limitless in the Champions League Fukuoka results. The Noctowl Ogerpon deck, I do think it has potential to be kind of the S tier deck. And this is because it is a toolbox deck of all basics, of course, except for the Noctowl. So, and the Noctowl is a very, very consistent card. So the consistency engine is there. And then you even have other pieces of consistency engine, such as the Teal Mask Ogerpon's Teal Dance. Like I said, we'll take a look at what these lists actually look like in a bit, if you don't already know. But the Noctowl Ogerpon toolbox deck is going to be pretty resilient because of how well it can tech around things. You know, it's got the Lily's Clefairy, it's got the Wellspring Ogerpon. You could put Cornerstone Ogerpon. We saw a top placing list from the Champions League Fukuoka put a 1/1 for Farigiraf EX line into their Noctowl Ogre box. So a very versatile, very techable deck. And I also think there will be a lot of skill expression for this deck. So it'll be pretty scary to play against when you're playing against a player who really knows what they're doing with it. And even then, I think it'll just be a generally strong deck. So I'm putting that up into the S tier. So far in my testing, it does look like the Noctowl Ogerpon box has at least a slight edge into the Dragapult matchup. I mean, Dragapult is obviously a very strong card, and the Dragapult archetype is a very strong deck. So I don't think it has, an awful matchup into the Noctowl Ogre deck, but it does look like the Noctowl Ogerpon deck is going to be, at least, like I said, at least slightly favored into Dragapult at the moment. So because of that, I was tempted to put Dragapult into the A tier, but I realized that I think these two are going to have that kind of relationship where Dragapult might chase away the things that are good into the Ogre deck, and potentially vice versa, or maybe something that hard counters Ogre won't hard counter Dragapult. We'll have to see. Of course, off the bat, you might think, well, Milotic counters Terra Pokemon. Dragapult's a Terra Pokemon, and the Noctowl Ogerpon, most of their attackers are Terra Pokemon. They do have Lily's Clefairy that's not a Terra. They do have Blood Moon Ursaluna that's not a Terra. Some decks even tech in a Tapu Koko EX, which I'm not sure if and when it's coming out in English. So that Tapu Koko EX that I'm talking about, stay tuned to find out when that will actually be uh, in the TPCI regions. But the Tapu Koko EX is also not a Terra Pokemon, and it's Lightning type, so it can actually easily one-shot Milotic EX. There are options around Milotic EX, and I think players are definitely going into this format, at least players who are researching the format, they know that the wall deck is around. They know that there are many kinds of walls, Milotic, Farigiraf, Noivern, Cornerstone. So that's on the radar. So techs for them will also be on the radar. But yeah, more on Dragapult. Specifically, like I said, Dragapult, Dusknoir, Badoo. Badoo item lock is very strong. Dusknoir is very strong for accelerating the pace of the game and also for manipulating prize cards to activate things like Counter Catcher, make Iono stronger, activate Counter Gain. Not necessarily in this deck, but it's something that it can do elsewhere. So Dragapult, Dusknoir, I still think it's very, very strong, even though it might be faltering a bit to the other deck that I have up here in S tier. We're going to leave Dragapult up here for now in the S tier because it's a very strong deck. It covers a lot. These are the two decks that I expect you need to be able to go at least like 45, 55 or better against, or like on the day of the tournament, you probably need to beat both of these decks in your games to like win the tournament. And remember, like I said, before we continue, this is definitely speculatory. I have been researching a lot of the data. I have done some testing. I have done some deck building. So, my opinions are opinions, definitely open for discussion. So, if I were to say Sarah Ledge is S tier and you vehemently disagree with that, please let me know in the comments down below. Spoiler alert, Sarah Ledge is not S tier, so that is just an example. Let's move on. I actually want to put Flareon EX into A tier. The Flareon EX Noctowl deck. Now, there are a lot of Noctowl Terra boxes, right? Noctowl can be played with the Ogerpons. It can be played with Terrapagos. It can be played with Flareon, Sylveon, Leafeon. It can be played with Charizard. We're seeing that in Japan. It can even be played with Dragapult. You can play like a Dragapult Terra box. So Terra box itself is a very, very loose term. So please note that we do have the Ogre Terra box, which is typically going to run 2 of the Teal Mask and 2 of the Wellspring. That's kind of its defining factor of being the Ogre box. And then we have the Flareon Noctowl box. That one is running the single prize EV, the EVEX, that's Terra, and then it's running Flareon EX, and typically going to be running Sylveon EX as well, and sometimes Leafeon EX. The Sylveon EX is really cool. In a recent video, I was talking about that if you have Lily's Clefairy down, you can one-shot Dragapult with its first attack, which is true. However, its attack, which I believe is called Magical Charm on the Sylveon EX, says next turn you take 100 damage less from attacks from the defending Pokemon. So that doesn't work if you knock out the defending Pokemon, because then they move up a new one. So the damage reduction doesn't stay when you take a knockout, so the card is less good in that situation than I was letting it on to be. But the Sylveon EX also has the attack that the name is escaping me at the moment, but it allows you to shuffle 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon into their deck. So that can also be incredibly impactful on game states. The Flareon EX Noctowl deck, of course, it has the consistency of Noctowl. I cannot understate that Noctowl is an insane card. I've been saying this since it was released. Now that the card pool is smaller, Terra Pokemon are more prevalent. We have all the Terra Pokemon released that we're going to get most likely. Noctowl is at like full power right now. So it's so insane that you have this stage 1 evolution that has Fan Rotom to search out the babies and itself. Terra Pokemon are very easy to just get a Terra Pokemon benched because a lot of them are basics. And then Noctowl just searches for 2 trainer cards. Very, very, very strong card, very consistent card. So when we're talking about any of the decks that involve the Noctowl engine, remember, these decks can search for literally anything they want. They can search for their Energy Switch, their Counter Catcher, their Ace Spec, their Sparkling Crystal, Crispin. So these cards that are kind of combo-y, like Crispin, like Sparkling Crystal, like Energy Switch, the combo-iness of them starts to matter a lot less because you have Noctowl to just go handpick whatever you want. If you were around for the time of the Shady Dealings engine, we're going to be doing something a little close to that, except Noctowl doesn't have a stage 2 that doubles the effect like the Drizzile and Teleonline did. Anyway, Flareon EX, a couple key notes about it. It can evolve and start attacking turn 1 because of the single prize Eevee that allows you to evolve if it's in the active. Also because you can either go like, if you're playing it with like Teal Mask Ogerpon, you could go like Teal Dance and then Energy Switch. If you're playing it with Glass Trumpet, you can go Glass Trumpet, Energy Switch. If you are playing it with Crispin, of course, you can also get that turn 1 from Crispin. You can also just go Sparkling Crystal Attach and start attacking. And then the great thing is that Flareon EX, number 1, it's fire type, so you're hitting some stuff for weakness. You're hitting Teal Mask Ogerpon for weakness. You're hitting Golden Go for weakness. You're hitting Archaladon, Duraludon, those things for weakness. Of course, they have an attack that removes weakness. You're hitting Hopsazashin for weakness. So you're hitting some good stuff, some cards that are here in the tier list today. You're hitting them for weakness. And you're also accelerating energy with the attack. So Flareon EX, really cool deck. I think it's good. I think it's favored into Teal Mask, the Teal Mask Wellspring Noctowl box. I think it's probably slightly favored into that at the very least. And then I don't know exactly how it is against Dragapult. I haven't played that matchup, but I'm sure it's at minimum fine. You can do a lot of cool stuff with the Sylveon, like I was saying. You can just shuffle, like, let's say you knock out one Dragapult, they send out the next one. You can just go like, okay, boss something up, and then shuffle your Dragapult and your only other Dracloak into the deck, and then your opponent has no attackers next turn if they're not playing other attackers besides Dragapult, which that's how a lot of the decks go. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff with the Flareon Noctowl deck, and just like I said, Noctowl in general, very, very strong. A deck that's not being talked about a lot, Terrapagos with Buffalant, and this is another Noctowl deck. I think Terrapagos Buffalant Noctowl has a lot of potential. We see it not being played too heavily in Japan, but its rate of winning is actually very, very high. On the site we're going to look at after I make the tier list, they have a statistic. I've also done the statistic a little bit of a different way in a spreadsheet of my own, and it comes out showing obviously Terrapagos, Noctowl, Buffalant very high on the conversion rate of points. Essentially, what the statistic shows is how many times did Terrapagos, or how many times did a deck make it into top 16 at City Leagues, and then out of those top 16 placements, how many of those were first places, how many of those were second places. And Terrapagos, Noctowl, Buffalant has a very high rating in that regard because it's not getting a lot of low placements. It's getting a few very high placements, and that kind of brings its rating up in that kind of scale, if you're interested in that kind of scale. But I see Noctowl, Buffalant, Terrapagos being a good deck. It makes Terrapagos very tanky, which is good against the other Ogre box. It also can be good against Dragapult. It could even be good against something like the Flareon EX that starts out with pretty low damaging attacks to start powering up the deck. So Terrapagos, Noctowl, Buffalant, not very popular right now. Might never be very popular, but I think it's pretty good. I also think that Terrapagos, Noctowl, Buffalant is likely always going to be playing Lily's Clefairy EX as well. We'll be seeing Lily's Clefairy EX being thrown into a lot of stuff. I also wanted to mention not straight, Lily's Clefairy EX. It honestly, in the optimal state, this probably looks very similar to the Noctowl Ogerpon box deck, except that it's more focused on stringing together Lily's Clefairy EXs with that orb tool on it that says that the Pokemon's only worth one prize if they knock it out with damage from an attack. And so trying to chain these Lily's Clefairies as single prizers with Area Zero, doing some good damage. I think that's a viable strategy as well that could maybe even move up into A tier at some point. But what I think is likely to happen is that we'll see Ogerpon Owls and Terrapagos Owls, these decks, uh, using the Lily's Clefairy maybe a 2 count instead of a 1 count, and playing a Lily's Orb, or whatever the orb is called, that makes it worth one less prize card. I think that's also a very likely thing that we can see happen, that Lily's Clefairy gets implemented a little bit more heavily into these other decks, and then this deck just kind of doesn't exist because every deck can play Lily's Clefairy. But I'm going to put a Lily's Clefairy focused build into B tier. Next into A tier is Archaladon EX. Archaladon EX was already pretty good pre-rotation. It's looking good here for a couple of reasons. So number one, the Ogerpon Owl deck can only knock out Archaladon in one hit with exactly Pikachu EX. Now, it's pretty easy to get a Pikachu EX. You really just need Crispin plus Sparkling Crystal. That builds the Pikachu EX. But if they're playing Jamming Tower, if Jamming Tower, of course, can just like make it hard to get that first one. If they like replace your Area Zero, so now you're down one bump, and now next turn you need Sparkling Crystal to get this Pikachu EX out of nowhere that one shots the Archaladon. So now you have to replace the stadium again. Maybe not that hard because you're a Noctowl deck. Depends really how many resources you used prior. But either way, after that first attack, it can then become harder to chain additional Pikachu EXs, especially if they have a way through the Pikachu EX. I know that Monkey Dory Dark in Archaludon, which is actually something I tested months ago. I'm seeing it pop up more and more now um in post rotation. I'm also seeing Archaludon with Brute Bonnet and Baby Pecharunt. The Brute Bonnet's really cool because that allows you to go through Pikachu. You hit it, it heals, then the poison ticks it between turns. So that's an option as well. So I'm thinking Archaludon should be favored into the Terra Noctowl, the Ogerpon Noctowl. I'm trying to be specific when talking about these Noctowl decks. The Ogerpon, the S tier Ogerpon Noctowl deck, I think Archaludon should be at worst even into, but very possibly favored into it. It could potentially be favored into Dragapult as well. I see no reason for it not to be. Um, the Flareon deck, really don't know. It was really just like I said, I have limited information about the matchups and how solid they are or are not. So a lot of this is theory. And then against the Terapagos Noctowl Buffalant, again, don't know exactly how that matchup will go. So very early in the theory, but I think Archaludon will be an A tier deck. And then looking at how many of these decks don't want to get one shot. Terapagos Buffalant, try not to get one shot. Dragapult, very high HP, doesn't want to get one shot. Archaludon, very high HP, doesn't want to get one shot. Goldengo EX is also pretty strong into this meta. It can one shot things. That's what it tries to do. So if the meta is made up of a lot of other two prizers that are trying to survive for more than one turn, that's a very good meta for Goldengo EX. And the last deck I'm going to put into the A tier, I believe, is going to be Raging Bolt Ogerpon, which is also a Noctowl deck now, I believe. So there's that. It kind of reminds me of when, again, I'm going to relate this back to the Drizzile and Teleon from Sword and Shield era. It reminds me of that. And then what they did for that was they brought out the Jolteon Memory Capsule. Actually, no, Jolteon Memory Capsule just happened to already be printed, I want to say. No, Jolteon Memory Capsule came out in Vivid Voltage. Okay, final answer. Jolteon Memory Capsule came out in Vivid Voltage. And that was an answer to the Drizzile and Teleon engine, right? It says, any of your opponent, all Pokemon, all water Pokemon have no abilities. Which was a very, like, obvious counter to Drizzile and Teleon. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something come out, you know, like Spiritomb-esque, Jolteon Memory Capsule-esque, something like that, that like somehow shuts off Noctowl. Wouldn't be surprised. But we can also think of, okay, what are other ways that we can take advantage of a Noctowl deck? Something like Hydreigon that can knock out multiple Noctowls at a time, or anything that adds up to good math for knocking out multiple Noctowls at a time. Maybe like Frostlass could potentially be a thing because all the Noctowls have abilities, so your opponent's putting a lot of abilities onto the board. And Frostlass is something we will get to. But just noting, you know, a lot of Noctowl decks. Noctowl, 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 probably Noctowl, and we're not even done yet. But Raging Bolt is good for similar reasons to two of the decks. So it's good for a similar reason to Noctowl Ogerpon because it's an all basics oriented deck. So you're going to have easier setup, easier consistency, hitting your benchmarks earlier in the game easier when you're playing with mostly single prize. I'm sorry, not single prize, basic Pokemon. But also like Goldengo, it is a one-shot machine. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to be the best basic Pokemon at one-shotting, while Goldengo is trying to be the best stage 1 Pokemon at one-shotting other things. So these two are here for very similar reasons. While Archaludon is here because it's good at tanking damage with its high health, it's also kind of like a build itself Pokemon, similar to how like Arceus V-Star was, right? Arceus V-Star, it's like, okay, you evolve, now I'm going to V-Star for double turbo plus a card, and I'm good to go. Similar with Charizard. We evolve, Charizard gets its own energy, we're good to go. Archaludon, a build-itself Pokemon, so it has that inherent reliability to be able to attack turn 2 most games, and also have high health, and be pretty hard to knock out because its attack removes its weakness. Going into the B tier, already talked about this Lily's deck a little bit, just because I think this will probably just be outclassed by toolbox decks that then incorporate Lily. Then we've got Charizard. Charizard is still a good deck, and please note that the tiers here are kind of in context of all of the decks listed. So there's obviously other decks that I could find to put in F tier and then like put in F minus tier. Like we could go find like really bad decks. But just out of the decks that are on this tier list, that's the context. So the bottom tier list isn't necessarily the worst decks in the world, but they're the worst decks out of this collection of decks. Just want to make that clear. Hopefully you didn't all skip past this portion and you hear this part. But yeah, Charizard B tier. So a couple of things. Badoo hurts Charizard a lot. Why doesn't Badoo hurt Dragapult, you might ask? It's because Dragapult has a good stage 1 Pokemon. You actively want to evolve all of your Dracloaks because they're how you draw cards. Charizard, the power of Charizard Pidgeot was turn 2 Candy Candy. I now have the 2 strongest stage 2s in the game on my board, and I dare you to do something about it. That was Charizard's dominance. But Badoo puts a stop to that a little bit. And then also the fact that Teal Mask Ogerpon is a very, very good card. It's in multiple meta decks. That's a problem for Charizard because this is just a Charizard one-shotting machine. We will see multiple builds of Charizard. There's Charizard Noctowl, Charizard Pidgeot, Charizard Noctowl and Pidgeot. There's a Charizard Noctowl Terra Box that then uses the Ogerpons, like Water Ogerpon plus Charizard. There's a lot of stuff you could do in this format. But yeah, Charizard in general, we're going to put into the B tier for the reasons I discussed, but it's still a very strong card. You know, Charizard EX, probably the strongest card in the game since Zacian V, I'd say. Is very, very powerful. It can definitely still do well in post-rotation format. B tier are decks that can do well. You know, like I said, B tier and up, these are decks that can win tournaments. So with that in mind, I'm going to put Feraligatr up here. It's likely just going to stick around as Feraligatr Milotic, like the one that won Champions League Fukuoka. So note that I'm saying this B tier deck, it won a 5,000 plus tournament in Japan in post-rotation format. So B tier does not mean the deck is bad. It just means it's either being outclassed by some things or it's situational into the meta game, which I think is Feraligatr Milotic's case. When Milotic is very on the map, that's just the kind of card that naturally is going to kind of waver in its favor into the meta game. Milotic really relies on the ability that says it cannot be damaged or affected by the attacks of Terra Pokemon. So if Terra-based decks either shift to the players that would normally play a Terra-based deck, maybe they shift to other decks, or the Terra-based decks tech for Milotic. I was mentioning Luxray Reversal Energy. I was mentioning Tapu Koko EX. Even something like playing Goldango Dragapult, you have the option of Dragapult while also having Goldango that's not a Terra Pokemon. Which does bring me to mention Goldango Dragapult. I think I would just put Goldango Dragapult in the same spot as Goldango here. And then I think in a similar vein for Dragapult Charizard, I think I'd put Dragapult Charizard the same place that I put Charizard EX. But yeah, so Feraligatr Milotic is a very good setup deck. We haven't had a lot of like setup evolution-y decks. And it's also set up because you want like multiple Monkey Dories online. You have your Relicanth. It's a deck that really is all the parts are cohesively working together, which is very, very cool. And then you add in the Milotic as a secondary attacker, as a different kind of wall that you can send up there into the Terror matchups. So it is a good deck. It can be a little clunky. It has things to piece together. It has moments of opportunity for the opponent to dismantle the setup. So those are kind of the weaknesses that are leaving it into B tier. And also, like I said, Milotic is on the map, very techable against. Ends Zorark and Ends Darmanitan deck. We're going to put that into the B tier. I think that this is a fine, solid deck. I don't have a lot of strong opinions on it in either direction, so I'm gonna kind of leave that to the comment section. Maybe some of you guys have already started testing this deck. Like I said, I have limited testing so far, mostly with the top few decks, but I do have a lot of data analysis that I've already done, a lot of deck list collection, a lot of metagame analysis that I've already done, so I definitely feel comfortable talking about most of these decks, especially in a more general sense. So yeah, we're gonna put Ends Zorark there, and then I'm going to put the Milotic Walls deck for a similar reason to the Feraligatr, right? Like Milotic Walls was dominating early City League events, and then it also had a great showing. Just Walls in general had a great showing at Champions League Fukuoka. And now that that's out there, that's on the map. We're seeing walls be, in terms of popularity, in terms of frequency that we're seeing walls at city leagues, it's in like tier 4. It's not doing very well in terms of frequency. But I do think it's still a strong deck, and the second people stop respecting it, it will feel like an S tier deck again. And then people will start respecting it, and then it goes down, and then it ends up evening out somewhere like a B tier deck, in my opinion. And this one might be a hot take, but I am going to put Frostlass deck into B tier. I've seen some impressive conversion results from the City League data. The CSP rating that I was talking about earlier, which we will see when we go into the Japanese data and deck lists after this tier list. Make sure to stick around for that. I believe that the Frostlass deck is doing pretty well in those scales as well. The Frostlass deck is playing as Pathra EX, Frostlass, Badoo, Monkey Dory, I believe. Those are kind of the main cards that are indicative of the Frostlass deck. Spreading damage around, item locking, trapping something potentially to give yourself more time to spread damage around. And I was talking about all the Noctowl decks. Noctowls have abilities, Noctowl decks also kind of want to play items, Ultra Ball, Energy Switch. Ultra Ball gets the Noctowl, so if you're Badoo, then maybe they can't even find their Noctowls. Then once they do evolve their Noctowls, now they're taking damage for having them. So, and then a lot of their Pokemon have abilities as well, like Teal Mask Ogerpon, like Lily's Clefairy, like Blood Moon or Saluna. They have abilities as well. So, the Frostlass deck, I know it has potential, and I think I'm comfortable putting it with these other decks into the B tier. I think that's about where its potential slash current power level is at. Okay, so moving on to C tier, there are a few decks that I was tempted to put into the B tier that I'm going to put into C. Those are Gardevoir and Blissey and Hops Zacian. So let's talk about these. Gardevoir EX loses Refinement Curlia, so I'm mostly concerned about this deck's on-board state. Um, most decks just have like if by default a deck can have Pheasantipity EX as its on board, right? But like compared to all of the Noctowl decks, if you have a bunch of Hoot Hoots on the board and you get Ionoed or Stamped or something, all you need is a Noctowl or a way to find a Noctowl, and then you're automatically back in the game. So Gardevoir losing Refinement Curlia is definitely big. Like the deck is like a different deck almost at this point. But if it can manage to play without that onboard support, without that stability that Curlia brought to it, if it's still very strong, right? So like there's a world where Gardevoir can function off of like researches, Arvins, what have you, and not necessarily need the Curlia, but there are going to be games where that extra draw could have gotten you there, and that's what's keeping me to put this deck into the C tier. I definitely think it has potential, but yeah, I'm putting it a tier lower. I'm tapering my expectations kind of thing, splitting this into kind of B tier 1 and then B tier 2. Um, the Blissey deck. So Blissey actually got third at Champions League Fukuoka. I feel like not enough people are talking about that. And it was essentially a Blissey slash Walls deck. You could also build Blissey Pikachu EX. You can also build just straight Blissey and tank with Blissey, like with Hero's Cape, which I think also the Walls deck plays Hero's Cape. So there's a lot of potential there and a lot of logic towards the Blissey deck. High HP, inherent draw power with the attack, works very, very well with Monkey Dory, works very, very well teching in like a toolbox of attackers because Blissey costs colorless and can move energy around. So there's a lot there going for it. It just feels like the early turns are weird. Partially feeling like it's because you can't buddy poffin for chances. You basically can't play Buddy Poffin in a Blissey deck because you're not getting anything. And so it makes me want to play Trolley, but then if you play Trolley, that means you can't play Hero's Cape. And also if you play Trolley, you're very susceptible to Badoo just shutting down your game. So I think the early turn clunkiness of Blissey, just generally the clunkiness all game with Blissey, is what makes me put this into C tier instead of B tier. But looking at Champions League Fukuoka, it did get third place. Can't really discount that, but I am putting it in C tier. And then Hobbs Zacian, I just need to see more from this deck. Like I see the vision. It's like a spread deck that's attacking for 0 energy, and your attachments are going to Monkey Dories. Because you have the basically like the energy gain plus choice belt thing that all the hops Pokemon get. That's a broken tool card. You have Cramorant, which is pretty nice, has some baby Buzzwole vibes. You can also play it with our Chaladon, and use our Chaladon as kind of just like an energy Excel bot to power up your Zacian for its second attack. So I see the visions, I see the potential there for Hop Zacian EX. I don't think it's quite there yet to bring to major tournaments and expect success, but we'll have to see. Maybe there are some metagame interactions that could leave an opening for Hop Zacian at some point, and that's really what I'm kind of thinking about with these, mostly the C tier decks. The C tier decks really need to find like that perfect time where the metagame falls and you understand what the metagame looks like and why certain decks are good. And you see Gardevoir looking like, oh, well, Gardevoir can be built to beat like 5 out of the 7 top decks. That's when one of these C tier decks get good. When people aren't really expecting them to be able to take advantage of an opening in the metagame. So that's kind of what I'll be looking for with the B tier decks and with the C tier decks. And then going into the D tier, the way I'm going to separate D and E tier are going to be decks that I would actually invest my time in for a couple of games to see what they're all about. And then E tier is just going to be like, I don't even want to play these decks. Like, I already know they're bad. I already know I'm not playing them to a tournament. So I would put them in E tier kind of thing. So the decks I want to put in D tier are Mamoswine EX. I think that actually has some potential. The biggest thing is that it really sucks that it's weak to grass because, again, Teal Mask Ogerpon. Although Teal Mask Ogerpon, yeah, it'll one-shot it if Mamoswine has 2 and Ogerpon has 3. 5, 150 plus the base. Yeah. So Mamoswine gets KO'd by Teal Mask, but I guess you could play Mamoswine with Hero's Cape, and then it has 440 health. So Mamoswine deck, I'm not going to talk about these decks at length because I want to get into the Japanese City League data and deck lists now, but I'm going to put this in D tier. Also going to put Slowking into D tier. High potential, but also very high volatility. And I'm just going to throw the rest of this into E tier. Like, future hands, like I don't see that deck being a thing. Yeah, I'm just gonna put these in E tier and save us some time. If anybody wants to fight me on any of these, I think Ceruledge is an awful deck. Maybe Ceruledge deserves D tier. Yeah, I'll put it into D tier. I'm gonna get some unsubscribes and down votes and hate mail if I put Ceruledge in E tier. So we'll put it up into D. It probably deserves it. I'm just being a hater. So that is my speculatory tier list right now as of March 11th when I'm recording this video. And now we're going to go over to this site, which I will put in the links or in the comments or description or something. And so what this site does is it scrapes the data from City League events, last updated March 9th. So we're only a couple of days off, and it's the weekdays. So the City Leagues, typically, most of them are happening on the weekends, from what I understand. And we're going to take a look at this. So their tier list here is based off of results data of the City Leagues. So the frequency of results, right? And now this is where it's helpful for me to make my own tier list, because Terrapagos EX, this is the Terrapagos Noctowl Bouffalant, for example. They have it in tier 4, but that's because it only has like 10 people who have actually played it into top 16, and this only collects data from top 16. But like I said, its CSP rating is actually out the wazoo compared to the other decks on this list. Like, if we go look at Ogerpon box's average CSP, it's 32.2. Terrapagos is 39. Yet the site lists it into tier 4 because it's based specifically on the frequency of results and the points that they're putting up, not the average amount of points earned. So that's why it's good to have some kind of variety of tier list placements, so that I can say, okay, this is only down here because it's not popular. I want to put it up there. And that's what I did with my tier list, right? So let's start at the top with Dragapult. We'll see its meta share here. That's just over the weeks. So this is current week, last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and you even see the letters here next to the Japanese writing, the 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, etc. So and they consider anything that's a 50 or higher on this statistic to be an active deck in the metagame. So Dragapult is definitely an active deck in the metagame. And I'm just going to look at like one, maybe two lists from each of these, say a couple of notes, but because this isn't necessarily a deck list video mainly, but I'm leaving the link so you can take this link and then look at whatever else you want to look at. So the first place list here that they show, one of the most recent first place lists, we'll see Dragapult, Dusknoir, Badoo. They are playing Blood Moon or Saluna, and I think it's a good idea to have a secondary attacker in the deck that's not Dragapult for shenanigans like Sylveon shuffling all of your Dragapults into the deck or something. You know, yeah, it's nice to have a Pokemon that's a basic that you can slap down and maybe start attacking with other than Badoo. We'll see that they are going with Unfair Stamp here, and Unfair Stamp looks to be 63% of Dragapults 16th place or higher are playing Unfair Stamp. And it's down to about 30% or so playing Sparkling Crystal. The other ace specs really don't matter. 6 people played Precious Trolley, 5 people played Prime Catcher. Like, it's got to be Unfair Stamp or Sparkling Crystal, in my opinion. You'll also see some interesting tool decisions. Bravery Charm to protect maybe your own Duskull from an opposing Dragapult. Maybe a Bravery Charm on a Dreepy to protect it from an opposing Wellspring Ogerpon. Then Defiance Band to do more damage, of course. Getting over that 200 damage hump can be very important because the Ogres have 210. And plenty of other Pokemon have 220 or 230 as well. And then also EXP share. So if your first dragon goes down, or like maybe you attach to a Dreepy or a Dracloak to use TM Evo, or you attach to anything to use TM Evo, then you put EXP share in your bench Dreepy. Now you're not forced into needing Crispin next turn since this deck doesn't play Sparkling Crystal. Next down the line is the Noctowl Ogerpon deck. We'll see here. You know, I was talking about a lot of this deck internally in the tier list. I was mentioning that you'll see the 2/2 of Teal and Well, Pikachu, Lily's Clefairy, and this one's cool. So it's kind of doing what I was mentioning, how some decks might bring in the Lily's Orb that makes Lily's Clefairy worth only 1 prize, and play a second Lily's Clefairy, second Psychic Energy. So, like I was saying during the tier list portion, that's something I've thought about, and I now see Japanese lists actually doing it. But yeah, I'm not even going to go too much further into detail with a lot of these lists because I already talked about what the lists entail during the tier list portion. Next, we have our Chaladon. Pretty interesting split actually for the A specs. We see them have 4 different A specs above 10% used: Secret Box, Maximum Belt, Prime Catcher, Scoop Up Cyclone. Of course, with Scoop Up Cyclone being the most popular, but I also wonder, is it the best or is that just kind of by default, right? And I wanted to look for one of the more interesting Duraludon lists or Archaludon lists that I was mentioning, like this one here, that's playing a 3/2 line of Archaludon, and it has heavy donk potential, playing 2 Mews with free retreats, playing Latias to give things free retreats, playing Ditto to turn into a Pecharunt if you want it to. So it has donk potential with the Brute Bonnet plus Pecharunt plus Perilous Jungle replacing the functionality of Hisuian Sneasler, Radiant Hisuian Sneasler. But not only does it add donk potential, it also means that your Archaludon now can hit 260 with Binding Mochi, 280 with Binding Mochi plus Perilous Jungle. So that's really nice. And then it comes back into 310 if your opponent doesn't switch their Pokemon. Next, Dark Charizard. They call it Evil Charizard. Freudian slip there. The original Dark Pokemon were meant to be called Evil Pokemon in Japan. So, little I don't know why I called it Dark Charizard, but Darkness type Charizard EX. Here we go. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to build this one. You can go Pidgeot, you can go Pidgeot and Noctowl, you can go Noctowl, you can go Noctowl with a box version. We'll just flip through the lists here and see a couple different kinds. You got Charizard Pidgeot here with the, is that Chi-Yu? Actually, I have to click on this to see. Yeah, that's Chi-Yu there. And the Chi-Yu can be used as a single prize attacker. Of course, that's what it is. It can one-shot Golden Go EX. It can one-shot Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, so because of its being fire type. So it's a pretty good attacker for those reasons. Not more Charizard, Pidgeot, Dusknoir. Then we got Dragapult, Charizard, Dusknoir, and these are first place lists, right? Yeah, these are first place. You can also pick, do you only want to see first place? Do you want to see all places of lists here? And then we're getting into kind of what I was talking about, the Charizard Noctowl box style deck, using the Water Ogre Pond, using Sparkling Crystal, still using some Dusknoir. Got the Cornerstone in there. And Cornerstone is not only good as a counter, but it's also good for getting through the counters because its Demolish attack does 140 and goes through all effects. So definitely keep that in mind. And then down to Raging Bolt. By the way, I'm going to stop at tier 3, I think. So and then I'll handpick a couple of tier 4 decks to look at the deck lists from. Basically the decks that I don't think should be in tier 4. They're only there because of their frequency of placements. So yeah, Raging Bolt, Ogerpon next. I just realized the English translation went away. Probably when I went to that other page and then came back. So yeah, Raging Bolt, Ogerpon. We see playing Noctowl, playing Noctowl, playing Noctowl, playing Noctowl. On average, let's see how many of these are playing Noctowl. 7.69% of Raging Bolt Ogerpon decks include 0 Noctowl. So, and then 59% include 1, and 59% include 4. So, from that, we can deduce that roughly 90% of Raging Bolt Ogerpon decks are playing either 2 or 3 copies of Noctowl, and then the Hoot Hoot percentages get a little weird because there's multiple Hoot Hoots that you can try playing. But it's probably 3-2, 3-3, 4-3 lines of Noctowl in the Ogerpon decks, as we can see here, or in the Raging Bolt Ogerpon decks, as we can see here. And Slitherwing, we're seeing a lot of Slitherwing because that's just a great card to toss in to counter Farigiraf EX that says can't be hit by basic EX Pokemon. Slitherwing's really good because it's ancient, so it gets the energy from Sada, fighting type, which also lends a hand. So it's good against single prizers, good against Farigiraf. It can one-shot Pheasantippides, which we know Pheasantippides is everywhere in this meta. Next on to Goldengo EX. There's a couple of ways to build this, right? There's Goldengo to Dunsparce, which gets the added capabilities of using the Dunsparce EX. It swings for 60 damage for 1 energy, 60 damage times the amount of EX Pokemon your opponent has on the board. So with these decks slapping down all the ogres and everything, there's a lot of decks that are going to be having EXs on the board. So the Dunsparce EX is a pretty cool attacker. More to Dunsparce. Then we see here Goldengo Dragapult. I talked about this at length in a recent video looking at the winning decks from Japan. I talked about most of these decks at further length in that video that I'm referencing, actually. I accidentally clicked on a deck. Let's just fix that. Translate again. That's where I want to be. Okay, and into what they refer to tier 3 decks. We have Flareon EX here. So Flareon EX is another deck that I talked about a lot throughout the most recent video, the winning decks video, and then also in the previous tier list portion of this deck. So we'll just take a quick look at some of the lists. We'll see here this one's using the one Sylveon EX. We see here that they're playing the Tapu Koko EX, the Milotic EX counter. We'll see here Leafeon EX as well. So that's typically as far out as the evolution spread of the EVs goes. I've also seen a single prize Jolteon be used. But like I said, you all can peruse this website and look at as many of the lists as you're interested in. Just want to give you a good overview, not spend too much time on any one list. Next, we're into Gardevoir EX here. Now, Gardevoir EX, 90% of decks are playing Brilliant Blender, and then a wide spread of the other ones under 10% use. So it does look like if you want to succeed with Gardevoir, you got to use Brilliant Blender. However, I kind of hate this card. It feels bad to play just to get energies into the discard pile. I feel like you could play, I don't know, Squawkabilly, more Ultra Balls, more Vessels, Research. But then is that better than just filling all those slots with a single Brilliant Blender and calling it a day? It looks like Brilliant Blender is the way to go, but I'll still have to test that out and see for myself if I decide that Gardevoir is a deck that I want to put more time into. Just giving a little view of the deck lists here. And we'll go on to the next, which is N's Zorak EX. And Zorak EX has a pretty interesting spread of A-specs as well, with 4 A-specs over 10% use. That's kind of the marker I'm looking for, is 10%. So 14% prime, 17% aroma, 30% unfair stamp, and 36% maximum belt. So even if you want to say, well, the one that's most used is probably the best, like, it's not even used by that much of a margin. Like, maximum belt has 23 decks in the data, unfair stamp has 19. That's not very significantly different. And then, yeah, most of these decks are going to look pretty darn similar because there's not a lot to work with for N's Zorak. You got 4/4 Zorak, you got a line of Darmanitan, you got a Reshiram or two, you got Monkey Dory because you're using Dark Energy. And most of the the deck kind of builds itself kind of vibe, you know what I mean? I think I just accidentally clicked on another deck list instead of moving the arrow, which is annoying. Take me back to the home page, please. Okay, and we're back. Just a couple more of the tier 3 decks to look through. So Hops Zacian EX looks pretty significant that they're playing Prime Catcher. And yeah, like I was describing, this deck is looking to attack for free with Hops Zacian, attack for free with Hops Cramorant, and use the energy attachments on Monkey Dory, use the energy attachment on your Hops Zacian if you need to. Maybe Jamming Tower stuck, maybe you can't find your tool. Use the energy attachments on Blood Moon or Saluna as well, potentially. And we got the Walls deck. Melodic EX actually has a pretty good average CSP. Should mention that. And then the A specs are split between these three. I've seen a lot of Pokevital A. Pokevital A was a popular choice in the Champions League lists, I believe. And then you're typically going to have some combination of Milotic EX, Farigiraf EX, and Cornerstone EX. If we go to the right, we'll see that they're also counting the Feraligatr Milotic in here, which I would not count these as the same deck, but that's just kind of how their data collection does it, I suppose. We'll see here, it goes back to the normal Walls style deck, Milotic Farigiraf Cornerstone, Milotic Farigiraf Cornerstone, Milotic Farigiraf Cornerstone, and a Mimikyu. So just to get the idea of what those look like. And we've got Ceruledge EX. Oh, look, awful CSP average. I will stop there. I know, I'm a Ceruledge hater. Not surprising that they're mostly using the Brilliant Blender. And for Draw Engine, we're looking at maybe Revivroom. Over here, we're looking at... Oh, I actually like this one. I talked about this one in the Winning Decks video recently. But they have kind of like a little Hops package going on. Hops Cram, Hops Double, Hops Snorlax. So you can do some good damage with the Hops Cram between the Stadium, the Snorlax, and the Tool. But it's all so very hard to find these cards. And you're playing Ceruledge, which is a Pokemon that doesn't have any draw power put into it. So I don't know. I'm not a Ceruledge fan, so we'll move on. And then we're on to the tier 4 deck. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I do want to look at Frostlass. Again, let's mention that Frostlass has a pretty high average points earned. Not a lot of decks, but, you know, a little top heavy with how good they're doing once they get into that range of performance. And yeah, playing Espathriax, Frostlass, Monkey, the Maractus. This Maractus is pretty interesting. If it's knocked out, the opponent takes 6 damage counters for knocking it out. And it also has a Retreat Lock attack for 1 energy. It does 20 and Retreat Lock. So pretty interesting card there. Terapagos, like I said, fantastic average points earned based on the frequency of it being played. And this is going to be Terapagos Noctowl Buffalant. And like I mentioned, probably will be playing Lily's Clefairy most of the time. See a couple of them playing Lily's Clefairy, get an idea of what that looks like. And for Alligator, there's kind of double showing the Feraligatr Milotic decks, I guess, here. We already saw these in the Milotic part, but this is a good deck. Its average points actually are pretty bad, but I think Feraligator's a solid deck. And then Blissey for the last one. So there's Blissey Pikachu, there's Blissey... Okay, that's not a good deck. So a lot of Blissey stuff that's a mess. I mean, there's Blissey with the walls. That's similar to the one that did well at Champions League Fukuoka. More Blissey with Pikachu. And then the The A spec that they're using for Blissey is definitely going to depend on the strategy. Like, are you trying to one shot with Pikachu? Are you trying to tank with Blissey? Are you trying to tank with walls and let Blissey move their energies around? But I did mention both Rescue Trolley and Hero's Cape in the tier list portion. I think these two are what you're going to stick to when building Blissey. So I'll leave the link to this in the description down below or in the pinned comment, or maybe even both. And just one last look at my tier list before we go. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in getting better at the game, I offer one-on-one coaching, and I also have a competitive masterclass on Metafy that bundles everything you need to know to become the competitive player and reach your potential. Links to that in the description down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.